through heaven and earth, I alone am ubiquitous. Hey guys, MrPokke here, back with another video. And today's CN analysis will feature Dr.Ratio, the free 5-star limited hunt unit provided by MiHoYo that quite literally everyone will have a copy of him as of the time of this recording. Heavily focusing on single target attacks, Dr.Ratio offers excellent damage output as both a hyper carry as well as a secondary DPS. The analysis today will seek to equip players with the most insightful knowledge from the CN community to fully prepare and make the best use of this free 5-star unit. Without further ado, let's get into today's content. Jumping straight into his character kit, his basic attack as well as skill has nothing important to note here. Dr.Ratio's kit is very straightforward, and the only two things that players need to take note of is his ultimate Syllogistic Paradox as well as his talent Cogito Ergo Sum. For his ultimate, it is a 140 energy single target damage, which can be quite concerning for players the moment they hear 140 energy. One thing to take note is that the follow-up attack for both from his skill as well as his ultimate, they do generate 5 energy. Think of Dr.Ratio's ultimate like Topaz ultimate, but instead of enhancing the next 2 follow-up attacks like Topaz enhancing the next 2 Nambi attacks, Dr.Ratio will increase the frequency of follow-up attacks. One increases damage while the other increases frequency. So one good thing about this is that with the increased frequency, Dr.Ratio's toughness damage potential is also much higher than our normal DPS units because repeated attacks, repeated follow-up attacks especially, they do deal more toughness bar damage as compared to a single burst skill. Then moving on to his talent Cogito Ergo Sum is essentially Dr.Ratio's bread and butter. A 40% base chance is pretty low to trigger a follow-up attack, so Dr.Ratio would need 3 debuffs on the target to land a 100% follow-up attack trigger rate. And this is going to be a fixed chance not affected by EHR or effect resistance. Note that the number seen on the screen is also the final trigger chance percentage, which means that even if, for example, if our Dr.Ratio were to break a target at 80%, applying an imaginary break, which would be another debuff, the trigger percentage for the follow-up attack will still be taken at 80% and not 100%. So whatever number you guys see on the screen, that is the final number. It is fixed the moment Dr.Ratio were to use his attack. Keep in mind that Dr.Ratio does have a debuff from his major traits, or 2 including his technique. He basically needs another debuff applier to consistently trigger the follow-up attack. So a teammate that instantly can come into a player's mind would be Topaz and her Proof of Death debuff, although others like Ranmei, Hela, Silverwolf, they are all also excellent choices to further increase the number of debuffs for Dr.Ratio. Note that this follow-up attack from the talent, it will still trigger if the main target is defeated, just like Nambi, although this time it will just be bouncing to a random target, which makes it a lot better compared to Qingque or Yanqing's follow-up attack, which will just not happen if the main target is killed. The follow-up attack can also trigger if we defeat the last enemy on our current wave, which means that Dr.Ratio will immediately release his chalk or follow-up attack into the second wave instantly. Lastly, for Dr.Ratio's technique, a mode of Idolatry, it is essentially an additional debuff that can synergize well with Dr.Ratio's talent, which guarantees a 100% follow-up trigger upon entering the battle if we were to accompany him with another ally. The speed debuff applied by Dr.Ratio is also a nice touch to prevent our debuffs from wearing off too fast, because the slower the enemies, then technically the longer our debuffs last. Then jumping straight into his traces, for his minor traces, it's going to be 20% attack, 12.5% defense, as well as 12% crit rate. The attack percentage and crit rate percentage, they're both excellent, although the defense percentage is slightly underwhelming for a DPS unit. Then moving on to his first and probably the most important trait is going to be Summation. When Dr.Ratio uses his skill, every single debuff will increase his crit rate by 2.5% and crit damage by 5% up to 6 times, which means we essentially get a free 15% crit rate and 30% crit damage. This means that even without any relics, with the addition of his minor traces, Dr.Ratio will have a 32% crit rate and 80% crit damage, which is really good and reduces the barrier to entry for new players to gear Dr.Ratio, making it a lot easier and more accessible for players to make use of him. Note that the buffs here, the crit rate and crit damage buff, they are permanent, which means that we don't have to stack on all 6 stacks of crit rate and crit damage instantly on a target with 6 debuffs. So sticking into the 3 to 4 debuff range, which essentially means if we cast our skill twice, we'll reap the full benefits of a summation. Then moving on to Inference, when a skill is used to attack at the enemy target, there's a 100% chance to reduce the effect rest by 10%. This is essentially a simple way of ensuring additional debuffs to improve Dr.Ratio's follow-up trigger rate as well as summation's ramp-up time. Although effect rest is not really important for Dr.Ratio since his follow-up trigger is going to be at a fixed rate. But that being said, this effect rest reduction is really useful for his debuffer and allies such as Pella and Silverwolf to land their debuffs, which lowers the EHR requirements, translating to probably higher speed or higher durability for your teammates. And then finally, Deduction when dealing a damage with 3 or more debuffs. Each debuff target has increased damage by up to 50%. The cap is up to 50%, and this would actually require the target to have 5 debuffs. So note that in order to achieve these 5 debuffs, we can make use of imaginary break, or in fact any break at all, to apply their respective effects, which is also counted as a debuff. Although the one ally that comes to mind which can really comfortably allow Dr.Ratio to get these 5 stacks is going to be Silverwolf, which is basically the queen of debuffs with all her 3 different trace debuff, a defense shred, a weakness penetration, and rest down, right? So but even if players do not get the full 5 stacks from Deduction, no worries, Dr.Ratio is still going to be dealing excellent amounts of damage. As long as he has 100% follow-up trigger rate, then everything else would be fine. Moving on to Dr.Ratio's Eidolons, note that for our Eidolon section, as well as for all of my future guides, especially for DPS units, I'll be covering a whole new video topic where I will feature every single Eidolon damage comparison, and for that, please stay tuned to the future video. But for today, I'll just be talking about their paper damage increments, right? Their sheet damage increments. Note that whatever we have on the sheets, they are never 100% accurate when we translate them into real life. E1 is basically increasing the summation crit buff to 25% crit rate and 50% crit damage permanently after we get the full ramp up time. Although this looks really good, but it is in reality a pretty mediocre increment, especially if you consider that it does take time to ramp up to the full effects. And at this point, if we were to compare this with Dr.Ratio's S1 signature lightcone, S1 at this point has a lot higher value, and I will be explaining this at his lightcone section. But going on to his E2, we deal additional imaginary damage based on 20% of his attack up to 4 times. So this is basically an 80% additional damage based on his attack if a target has 4 debuffs. This does scale much better compared to Eidolon 1, but at the end of the day, it is still a rather mediocre damage increase, and S1 at this point has a much better value even for a E2 Dr.Ratio. Then moving on to his E4. Now E4 is when Dr.Ratio's Eidolons really start to pick up in their value. When triggering the talent, additionally regenerates 15 energy. So now his follow-up attack, inclusive of his skill and his ultimate follow-up attack, will refund 20 energy instead of 5 energy. So the significance of this is, for example, if we were to run him with Ting Yun, he can do a 1-turn ultimate, which is extremely powerful because a majority of Dr.Ratio's damage output does come from his follow-up attack, and I will be explaining this in his energy threshold sections. But perhaps the most game-changing Eidolon is going to be Dr.Ratio's Eidolon 6, which increased the trigger count for Wise Man's Folly by 1 and the damage dealt by the talent's follow-up attack by 50%. This is going to be the game-changing Eidolon, and in fact, it is one of, if not the strongest DPS E6 Eidolon ever in honkaistarrail. It is extremely powerful because it not only does it increase all follow-up damage for Dr.Ratio, which, like I mentioned, is the majority of Dr.Ratio's damage output, it also increases his enhanced follow-up stacks from 2 to 3. Now, the reason for E6 being so strong is not particularly because of E6 itself, but it is more so E6 combined with E4. With these two combined together, Dr.Ratio can essentially have a 1-turn ultimate 100% of the time, every single time, which will eventually result in a more than 40% final damage output because of his massive barrage of follow-up attacks. And once again, refer to the energy section below. So in summary, Eidolons are completely optional for Drratio. In fact, his earlier Eidolons are really not that great. Kind of a way where MiHoYo is telling us there is really no need to pull for Drratio's Eidolons if you want to get the full benefit, right? You can make use of his E0, it will be perfectly fine and you won't really gain a lot of benefits. But the real value is when it comes to his Eidolon 4 and Eidolon 6 with the improved ultimate uptime as well as enhanced follow-up attack frequency. At this point, his signature Lightcone 1 is still a much better entry point for spending players considering to invest in Drratio. Then jumping into his energy thresholds, there really is only 2 key rotations, especially for an E0 Drratio, one with Tingyun and one without Tingyun. We always assume that Drratio lets go of 2 enhanced follow-up attacks, or basically the main target does not die prematurely. Because if the main target dies prematurely, Drratio will lose the remaining enhanced follow-up attack, which will lead to a massive damage drop-off. This is going to be a very important assumption. Note that both follow-up attack and enhanced follow-up attack generates 5 energy, and they do receive the benefits from energy regeneration rope. I will also be showing some E4 and E6 energy calculations for my whale villagers watching my channel. So without further ado, jumping straight into the E0 Drratio, without Tingyun, it is going to be 120 energy across 3 turns. So we would need to get 2 kills or get hit twice within 3 turns to get a 3-turn ultimate. Some players at this point might suggest running energy regeneration rope on Drratio, because with energy regeneration rope, you would be able to get 143 energy, guaranteeing a 3-turn ultimate. However, that is not recommended due to Drratio severely lacking attack percentage. Getting 2 kills across 3 turns with Drratio is, frankly speaking, not that hard. And not to mention, we do have a lot of additional energy regeneration sources. Not just from Tingyun, we have mechanics like Huo with Fine Fruit, or even a Quid Pro Quo, right? So something for players to consider. And then the rotation with Tingyun is going to be a 2-turn ultimate. Then with an additional 50 energy from a less than E6 Tingyun, it's going to be at 135 energy. If you guys do have an E6 Tingyun, that's going to be a 145, perfectly managing a 2-turn ultimate. At this point, some players may think Tingyun can't really achieve a 2-turn ultimate. That may be true, but if we are going to be running Tingyun, we should be running Tingyun as fast as humanly possible. Please slow down Drratio's speed and increase Tingyun's speed to widen the gap between these 2 units, so that by the time Tingyun goes 3 times, Drratio has only gone twice. So once that is accomplished, we can essentially keep up this very nice rotation where Tingyun will out every 3 turns, but every 3 of Tingyun's turn is only 2 of Drratio's turns, which creates our 2-turn ultimate combo. And then for the E4 Drratio energy calculation is that with a Tingyun, even a non-E6 Tingyun, Drratio can cast a 1-turn ultimate. But this 1-turn ultimate is not going to be sustainable, since it is pretty much impossible for Tingyun to go 3 times before Drratio goes 1 time. Which basically means that she will need more than 200 speed to accomplish this feat. So one good application for this is going to be for shorter burst fights, right? For 0 cycles, or for very quick overall clearing, right? So these are some of the situations where you guys might use this. And another bonus is going to be Drratio's Eidolon 6. Now, Drratio's Eidolon 6 with an energy regeneration rope as well as a 5% energy regeneration sources from Von Weck or Penacony can lead to a permanent 1-turn ultimate by Drratio himself, which is extremely powerful. You don't need to get kills, you don't need to get hit, you don't even need Tingyun, and you can have a 1-turn ultimate, which this ultimate has 3 enhanced follow-up attacks. But one thing to keep in mind is that on paper, while his E6 may seem extremely strong, in reality, you guys can see from my future video that we really don't have a single mob or even elite mob that can withstand 2 of E6 Drratio's follow-up attack hits, right? The only units that can withstand 3 follow-up attacks is going to be the boss targets, right? Your Kafka, Yanqing, True Swarm, and Argenti. So unless for these specific boss units, Drratio might not be able to maintain this permanent 1-turn ultimate, since he'll most likely not be able to let go of all 3 of his enhanced follow-up attack. Then jumping into his relic set, the best in slot is actually going to be the Genius 4 piece, especially against quantum weak enemies. But in reality, Genius 4-piece is in fact the best in slot for almost every single situation as long as our team has some kind of defense down sources. So for example, if you put for Dr.Ratio's signature lightcone, which is 24% defense down, then you definitely want to run a 4-piece Genius set. This is also extremely common for Dr.Ratio since some of his best teammates like Pella, Silverwolf, they will also have substantial defense down from the kit as well as a resolution lightcone, right? S5 resolution lightcone. E1 Runmate would also fall into this category. So what I'm trying to say is basically right now in honkaistarrail, there are a lot of sources of defense down. So generally speaking, not just for Dr.Ratio, but for most DPS units, 4-piece Genius is one of, if not the most universal DPS set that pretty much almost every single DPS can make use of. However, if players do not have Dr.Ratio's signature lightcone, or we simply have absolutely no defense down sources, 2-piece Bandit and 2-piece Duke is going to be a great substitute, right? For example, Topaz and a E0 Runmate. We do not want to use a 4-piece Grand Duke as Dr.Ratio's abilities are all single hit attacks. Couple this with a high follow-up attack frequency, it is basically impossible to stack on Duke's 4-piece effect. A 4-piece Bandit set is possible given that Dr.Ratio does have a very high break efficiency, which means that we can imprison our enemies quicker, or we can run Dr.Ratio with Weld himself. The Bandit domain, it is an extremely stamina inefficient place to farm because Firesmith is simply an underwhelming relic set. Even 5 units doesn't want to use Firesmith, right? So these are some of the relic choices that player can consider. Then moving on to his planetary set, it's going to be Salsoto / Glamour. They have basically close to no difference, and it will ultimately depend on the substats. So Glamour, it strictly speaking has a higher ceiling if we can hit 160 speed on Dr.Ratio, which can be achieved with the help of Runmate / Tingyun. While Salsoto's crit value, because you do get an additional 8% crit rate, it will really help with early relic clearing, especially for new players who are struggling to gear their Dr.Ratio with high crit value. And then one niche pick, and this is only for E6 Dr.Ratio, is the additional 5% energy regeneration from Von Weck or Panicani. This will ensure our permanent 1-turn ultimate rotation, and that is something for the whales to consider. Note, like I mentioned just now, Dr.Ratio's damage is so high that his Eidolons 6 may not even let go of his 3rd enhanced follow-up attack. So players might need to intentionally reduce the damage output just to gain the 3 enhanced follow-up attack trigger for a 1-turn ultimate. Then jumping into his main and substats, very standard DPS setup. We are going to be preferring speed boost to attack boots in order to improve our ultimate uptime, but energy regeneration rope is not that preferred since energy can be obtained from kills or hits, which are much more common than speed thresholds, right? Attack boots, though, it is fine for dual DPS setup where Dr.Ratio just wants to throw his follow-up attack, or if we're going to be using Tingyun giving Dr.Ratio a lot of energy as well as action value advance from duns, right? So something to consider. Note that on paper, for the imaginary sphere, right, imaginary or attack sphere, marginally better results than imaginary damage due to his teammates. Not Dr.Ratio himself, but his teammates, in particular Tingyun and Runmate. Tingyun's benediction, in case you guys didn't know, it is lightning damage. It will not work with imaginary damage, while Runmate has an extremely high amount of damage percentage in his kit unless we activate a E2 Runmate. So because of these reasons, attack are basically slightly better, but at the end of the day, it always boils down to this: whichever gear you have that has the best crit value, chances are you're probably going to use them, right? You always want to go for the gears with the best crit value. So for main stat, it's going to be crit chance / crit damage, boost is going to be speed / attack, roll is always attack percentage, and sphere is going to be either imaginary or attack percentage. Then for the substat, priority is going to be crit, followed by attack and speed, followed by pretty much any other substats. Jumping into his lightcones, to no one's surprise, Dr.Ratio's signature lightcone Baptism in Pure Thought is going to be his best in slot, right? Absolutely winning every other lightcone. Why? Because defense down is an absolutely the most powerful debuff in honkaistarrail. Having this 24% defense down also means that Dr.Ratio can potentially hit a 100% defense down with a Nihility teammate running S5 resolution, while Dr.Ratio himself wears a 4-piece Genius set, and that is in fact what I am personally using as well. I am going to be running a 4-piece Genius set for Dr.Ratio because of the additional defense threat from his signature lightcone. And then another alternative is that players do not want to pull is going to be Topaz signature lightcone. It's a very good substitute, and if players somehow got this Topaz lightcone without Topaz, we can give this to Dr.Ratio. But if players have both Topaz, Dr.Ratio, and the Worsen lightcone, but they do not have Dr.Ratio's signature lightcone, then we want to provide Dr.Ratio with the Topaz signature lightcone while we give Topaz a sword plate. she can much better make use of sword play as compared to Dr.Ratio. Right, and then the third last choice is going to be S5 cruising the Stellar Sea. Free to play substitute. Everybody has it and pretty much has everything the Dr.Ratio needs, right? Crit rate and attack percentage. Best choice for the general player base, considering that it is completely free. But for players who want probably an alternative, especially if you guys just spend it on the 4 of the Aeon, S5 only Silence Remains is also a really good choice, especially when you face against 2 or less elites, which may happen more than you think unless you're playing pure fiction. The effect also triggers much more easily than Cruising the Stellar Sea. Cruising the Stellar Sea, it forces Dr.Ratio to kill mobs as well as a potential 16% unused crit rate. So this is where areas only Silence Remains can outperform Cruising the Stellar Sea. So in summary, Dr.Ratio's signature Lightcone is extremely powerful and it is much more favored compared to his E1 or even E2 if players are thinking of splurging on Dr.Ratio's banner. Otherwise, Cruising the Stellar Sea is going to be a completely fine choice or even only Silence Remains. And finally, going on to his team composition, very briefly, since I also will be covering another video, the best installed teammate is going to be Topaz, right? Absolutely broken with Dr.Ratio, works really well due to their very high synergy with one another. Topaz, they have the proof of that debuff, Numbi's action value advance whenever we get a follow-up attack from Dr.Ratio, while both of them can receive excellent buffs from Runmate. Witness break efficiency, break effect, damage percentage, rest penetration, you name it. So Topaz and Dr.Ratio is truly like a match made in heaven. If we do not want to run a dual DPS running Topaz, then the alternative is going to be good old-fashioned Bronya with Dr.Ratio. But you can see the damage drop off really by quite a little bit here, 40,000 points over the course of this amount of turns. If you guys don't have Topaz, then you just have to work with what we have, right? Bronya, she's always going to be an excellent pick for hypercarry setup, with teaming closely behind for her energy and buffs. Silver Wolf is the de facto debuffer due to the guaranteed maximum debuffs as well as elemental coverage for Dr.Ratio. Although Pella does have a slightly faster clear, especially if you're going for 0 cycles, due to her ability to cast a turn 1 ultimate. So this will ultimately depend on the player base and what exactly do they want out of their Dr.Ratio. And with that, we have come to the end of today's content. If you guys want to engage in further discussions, feel free to check out my Discord at Pokke's Village, where we have a very active community talking about honkaistarrail on a daily basis. If you guys want to check out my stream, that's going to be at twitch.tv/MrPokke. I stream almost every single day. Schedule will be uploaded on Discord as well. All the best for Dr.Ratio if you're going to be putting for Dr.Ratio. All the best for a Kafka. All the best for a Lightcone pools. And I'll see you guys next time. Take care.
I genuinely cannot believe this shit. I genuinely cannot believe this shit. I genuinely cannot believe this shit, guys. Did I say how I genuinely cannot believe this shit? I genuinely cannot believe this shit, guys.